I have been capped a very small fish. I live in a Section 8 apartment that sometimes gets compared to a basement. I'm deaf and have been all of my life. And I now have Parkinson's as a senior citizen. I even have to go and get food somewhere where there are social barriers to my preservation. But that doesn't mean I'm not a trophy kill when it comes to Seattle and the government of the United States. Bob Ferguson, the governor of the state of Washington, and Pramila Jayapal of Seattle, Washington, are well aware of my utility to Hollywood. My name appears in a worldwide cinema magazine, by example, to give you an idea of some of the people who have seen it and concern themselves with me, being not for me. And all I'm trying to do is give a somewhat anecdotal, rational testimony about this enormous crime that was connected to organized crime from the military, which has been a social statement in a guerrilla theater presentation by whatever it is we've been dealing with. Gregory Carl says, the listener is led through a bewildering myriad of surface details to arrive at the fundamental themes, which I take to mean that if you look at the fundamental themes of what they're pulling, you can undo some of the bewildering myriad. This isn't a presentation that's constructed to be exhaustive. Surely you can, if you use your senses, bring to the table certain questions about what has happened that are certainly relevant, and the answers of which will be probably somewhat enduring if they're accurate and truthful and verifiable by the facts. So, what is the essential motive of the war operation that I testify about, which disposed of me as an expendable person, as a non-entity, as not a small fish, but a totally discounted symbol of genocide in the art of the deal about who to get rid of symbolically as a sacrifice and a scapegoat, something that Seattle, Washington civics embraced, even though I was a traumatized and battered Pittsburgh public school student. And they superimposed a narrative from Hollywood. They got Scorsese and Peter Gabriel in my case when I was about 11 years old. And they scripted and built a set with shacks and stolen cars and figures of prominence and significance in theater to represent what it was that they were pulling. And they tortured me deaf, and continue to deny it because they're applying Hollywood's versions. What is it that they're after? What is their organizing principle? Well, for one thing, it's called Two Virgins Pussy Ball. These people used me as a hostage in a setting that I couldn't escape. I was surrounded by violent criminal offenders. They forced me into sexual encounters when I was 13 years old. They also plied a girl who was about that age for their showcase of pornographic morality in a switchboard of sympathy control. If you know anything about the Hollywood superstate, you realize it's made up of groups of feuding personality cults. When the Rolling Stones came to play at halftime at a Super Bowl in Detroit, there was a uprising of black local recording artists from Motown and so on. And they had to strike some kind of deal to get the Rolling Stones into the halftime of the Super Bowl. Well, when it comes to my right to exist, I'm up against a poacher of major consequence to American media named Yoko Ono. She's left her calling card all over this matter. It's verifiable from a number of different sources. What do we learn by the way that Seattle controls my right to come and go? They're inflicting a Parkinson's on me. We learned several things about the organized crime and as well about the media contribution to the planning and execution of this organized crime throughout the 60s. Two Virgins Pussy Ball was clocked to the AIDS attack, and members of the NAACP were very certainly involved, as was Foreign African Society and Royalist Society around the world. There's evidence that the Russian Orthodox Church and Iran, during Iran-Contra, were privy to this matter. Michael Foucault met with the Ayatollah. My research does not stop there, but when you look at the idea of the rave scene in Israel, for example, you're talking about a festival that celebrates the bacchanalia, so to speak, of the sexual liberation movement, which in biblical terms is considered Sodom and Gomorrah. And a man named Sinwar came buzzing in to execute them. But the name Sinwar is from an index that begins with Israel in the AIDS attack. A woman named Gail Carolyn Burston sent me the Texas school book from Israel in the 1970s. So Nosferatu collaborated with Hamas in Egypt with the help of Donald Trump to sandwich the forces of Arab Spring and the international human rights movement with the purported excesses of the sexual liberation movement. Where does this come to in the malevolence of Seattle's civics culture? They have been whining and scraping and crusading and surrounding me and proselytizing and banging on the door about two things that they insufferably claim are dishonorable. More dishonorable than kidnapping and torturing a deaf child and forcing them into sexual encounters with fully grown adults they didn't even know, despite tears of trauma from this inhuman slavery. More dishonorable than that, they say, is a one-night stand with a woman from India. They made secret message audio recordings of things that they said to me, and then said that it was my fault that these memories existed, that they could, in their words, extrude using natural language forces impinging on the persona's experience. In other words, gaslighting responses from a neurological implant. They don't see this as dishonorable. They don't see as dishonorable invading the home of someone who they disallowed a marriage, humiliated with a cult of virginity, humiliated, deafened over a cult of virginity about which I knew nothing. trickery, lies, the usual. They try on arguments like Israeli Defense League forces try on the children's clothes and houses of families they've vaporized. That's how Seattle goes about its business. They see nothing wrong with using me in lifelong sexual trafficking, pornographic extermination, gloating that I look at occasionally because they castrated me chemically. Pictures of pretty women that are available for free online. Certainly, I feel that the pornographic industry that was implicated in this operation should be investigated. If you leave the issues of pornography to Nazism, it will be used for Nazism. But they claimed back in the days of the 60s to disregard those things, when in reality, they were well aware in Seattle and Pittsburgh that the shortcut to humiliating a rival is to attack them in their sexual identity. Don't make any mistake about the integrity of UW Dialectical. They try on those arguments like those children's clothes, not caring at all as to the truth of the matter when they have made a land stake. The Supernova Rave Massacre in Israel might as well have been called Operation Collection Plate. The idea that a C and a Star of David is the symbol of the Green Party's right to confiscate and distribute private property to their own victims, which Yoko Ono sells them by way of a fraudulent claim about John Lennon that establishes the disequilibrium between important people and the personality cults in Hollywood and the tall tales they sell and the meaninglessness of expendable, deaf, tortured, traumatized victims of those people. Operation Collection Plate was the Supernova Massacre, and Seattle Green Party has very solidly and intentionally sided with those murderers as they went on to massacre Gaza. This is the secret of the Sandbagger Blackout. They all side with McCartney and Ono when Peter Shell was making secret tapes of me at Carnegie Mellon University while pretending to give money to the Sandinistas. This was the days when Shulman was stealing from the museum and riding high, despite my attempts to contact investigators and report suspicions. This was the days when his partner Leslie Katz had the ear of Robert Fripp, to whom I introduced her. These were the days when Adam Eisenstadt would get on the radio disguising his voice as Abdul the terrorist, even though he was an IDF berserker, to scare people, and then went on to write for Donald Trump. There were a lot of things about those days that I don't like remembering. But one of the worst memories of all was being lured to Seattle by an abused deaf advocate service with promises of protection from abuse. Remember the red line at Rafa that Biden used to talk about? They were promised a safe zone, and then bunker buster bombs were dropped on their tents. That has the perfect integrity of Seattle, Washington civics and the so-called claim to be offering me protection from abuse, and then poisoning me in the mouth. Not even stopping at my odds. And hustling the idea that a one-night stand proves the social unity of gangs like Iran-Contra, the Russian Orthodox Church, Putin, for two versus pussy ball is their crusade. And I suggest that the people who think that's not true get it through their heads that it is, in fact, the truth. It was clogged to the AIDS attack. Yours truly had absolutely nothing to do with it. I resisted it on behalf of the gays. I resisted it on behalf of what I believed to be the interest of John Lennon at the time. I resisted it on behalf of what I believed to be the interest of Maduro Goto at the time, only to discover that John Lennon and Maduro Goto were in on it with Barack Obama and the Jeffin Corporation in a situation that traces back to Italian futurism at the turn of the 20th century, when they got the insight that to control the world, all you need to do was control media. And I have traced this media situation through their semiotics in international cinema that tell the story in three basic chapters of their semiotic background scheme. The escape of Hitler and his transformation into Casper the Friendly Ghost by synthesis and spiritual forgiveness by Jesus coming back from the dead as John Lennon in a unified field of might makes right. John Lennon pulled a Houdini with these people. The second is the murder of JFK over Hiroshima and the threat to get revenge that all of these stupid people from Seattle have put their money on, even though it would mean a flash that killed their own children. Why did they do that? Because of casino arguments that were made about Yoko Ono's domination and superior command power in the casino of Hollywood. Last but not least, they clocked two virgins pussy ball to the AIDS attack and planted the script on me named Gayle Carolyn Burston. That is the secret of the Sandbagger Blackout that they refuse to talk about because it's convenient for them to ignore it. All of these things, Gaza, AIDS, and the way it was handled, all of these things can boil down to what is convenient for the status quo to pursue and perpetuate. Make no mistake, alternative media podcast is a united group under Paul McCartney. They are a status quo. They're one of the wings of the so-called dueling axis. The axis of exploitation and the axis of resistance are the two wings of Paul McCartney's cult, who have suppressed the truth that Leslie Katz was a partner of John Schulman, and that Nosferatu, who was in on the supernova rave attack. Egypt hasn't moved. They haven't opened the Rafah Gate. They saw it as a convenient way to sandwich the forces of another potential Arab Spring with the forces of decadence that Seattle, you would think, would stand up for. Why are they so unbelievably creepy that they would be hounding in 2024 a deaf old man putting biologicals in my food over a one-night stand from 1986 that did not even happen the way that they claim? It was set up as guerrilla theater to demarcate the parochial objective of a philosophy school engaged in military operations of an organized criminal nature. What is wrong with Seattle, Washington? That this point has to be belabored over and over and over again for nearly 40 years. What is wrong with them? That they would go along with what's being done to Gaza.